two, three. One, two, three. Let's go.
Hi there, and welcome back to Culture in Action presented by Whistle. I am Alexa Dobler, your host. Today we are going to dive into our Equity Leaders pillar, which includes our DEI program. That stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And today we're going to be talking to Joanna Hoffman from Athlete Ally, and we'll be talking about inclusion, particularly in the LGBT plus community. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Joanna.
Joanna Hoffman is the Director of Communications at Athlete Ally. She has over a decade of experience in nonprofit communications. Her expertise is in using strategic digital engagement to guide audiences towards social change. She has worked at places such as Peace is Loud and Women Deliver. She is an accomplished poet who was honored at the White House as a champion for change. In terms of sports, she is a proud member of the LGBTQ running club Front Runners in New York.
Thank you so much for being here, Joanna. We so appreciate your time.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So before we get into the questions, I would love if you could just kind of explain a little bit about your background and how you came to work at Athlete Ally and what the work you guys do there.
Sure. So my name is Joanna Hoffman, she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Communications at Athlete Ally. I've been working there for about 4.5 years now. So kind of my journey to this job is I've been a runner since I was 14 years old. I joined my high school cross country and track teams and really never looked back. I just fell in love with the sport. And through my life, running has just been such a powerful physical and mental health outlet for me. It's made me some of the closest friendships I have in my life. A couple years back, when I was still living in New York, I joined a LGBTQ running club called Front Runners. And, being in that space, which was an athletic environment that was meaningfully inclusive, was just so different than any other athletic space I had ever been in. And so when I learned about Athlete Ally and the work that the organization does and that now I do together with my coworkers, I was really interested and intrigued and inspired by it. And so what we do holistically as an organization is we work to make sports more inclusive for LGBTQI plus athletes at all levels of sport. Specifically, what I do as the Director of Communications is make sure that both internally and externally, that everybody understands what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how they can get involved. And it's my job to make sure that information is clear and accessible and exciting for people. I want people to feel energized and excited about how they can take part in our work. Also a kind of an interesting pathway that led me to that communications aspect of things is that for many years, in my younger years, I was a slam poetry performance poet. And what I learned in doing that was, thank you. So what I learned in doing that was like how to be concise and how to be impactful. Basically how to have like the Twitter version of what I want people to know. And I think that has really served me well in my work here. And to just to say a bit more about what we do. So we work to address inequalities and challenges in sports through 4 primary ways, and that's education, policy, athlete activism, and research. So on the education side, we know that the people who have the most impact and influence in sports are often educated the least around LGBTQI plus respect and inclusion. So we try to really correct that however we can by making resources that are free, that are online, that are accessible. We have a curriculum for coaches called Champions of Inclusion that we're currently in the process of revamping. That's a free online curriculum for coaches really around the world who want to learn how to create inclusive team environments. And it really starts from learning about basic terminology, pronouns, and so on, up to how to actually create a trans inclusion policy, how to create a non-discrimination policy, how to put these different policies into practice and make sure that even after you leave the position you're in at a team or at a school, how you can make sure that there's a legacy of inclusion that sustains. We have worked with every incoming NBA player for the past 8 years, training them on LGBTQI plus respect and inclusion. We work with a lot of colleges. So we have campus chapters around the country where we work with student athletes to set up LGBTQ inclusion programming, whether that's Pride Nights, panels around events like National Coming Out Day and other kinds of similar activations, helping them work together with their athletic department to make sure that the athletic department is inclusive as it can be. And we also track how inclusive every athletic department is through what we call the Athletic Equality Index, which everyone can find at aei.athleteally.org. And that kind of ties in a bit of the policy work. We also work with a lot of state-based partners to speak out against anti-LGBTQ policies and legislation, specifically ones that relate to sport. And as I'm sure you all know, there's been a huge focus lately on trans inclusion in sport. So a lot of our work has centered on that, on finding professional athletes who want to use their platforms to speak out, who want to even go in person to testify, to write op-eds, to be vocal about their support for every person's right and ability to play the sport that they love. We often tap into our network of Athlete Ally ambassadors, which is a network of over 400 professional Olympic and Paralympic athletes who are both LGBTQI plus identified and allies, who just want to use their platform in different ways to speak out for inclusion. And then on the research side, we have a wonderful team of researchers that looks into the gaps around allyship and inclusion in sports and how we could best address those gaps.
That's amazing. That's such a great description of all the things that you all do at Athlete Ally. You really kind of touched on all those points. In looking at it, education, policy change, advocacy, all of these things are really important in the sports world in particular. And I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit to why it's so vital that we have organizations like yourselves, people doing this work when it comes to sports and athletes. Why is that so different?
So we know that LGBTQI plus youth are twice as likely to drop out of sports as their peers. There's a number of reasons for that. I think a lot of them, it has to do with bullying and discrimination. For others, it's because, unfortunately, they're in a state where they have to drop out because the state has restrictive laws and policies that make it impossible for them to participate. I think for all of those reasons, whenever an LGBTQI plus athlete has to stop participating in the sport they love, it's heartbreaking because, as many of us know, and I know how I know from my own experience as a runner, access to sport is life-saving. It teaches us about how to channel our sadness, our rage, or whatever we might be feeling into something productive and healthy. It teaches us lifelong lessons around how to work on a team, how to be part of something bigger than ourselves, how to work hard towards a goal, how to be a leader. These are all transferable skills that serve us in so many areas of our lives. And it also helps us to develop friendships that can be lifelong. And so I just know for myself, when I think about everything that running has brought to my life and the fact that, I have privilege as a cisgender person and that no one's ever tried to tell me I couldn't participate in women's sports. Right. And that should be the case. Everybody should have that same access and opportunity that I've had. Everyone should be able to access something that can enrich their lives and make their lives better. And I would hope that for people, not all of us are sports people, and that's okay. I would hope that people can extend empathy and think, if it's not sports, think about something else in your life that you love doing that brings you peace and serenity and joy, and how you would feel if someone told you you couldn't do that thing anymore. In the case of many of these bills that are attempting to ban trans kids from sports, what it's really about is legislators trying to erase trans kids, trying to ban them from all public life, which is really, when you think about it, erasing someone's humanity. So that's why I think this work is so critical.
Yeah. And, to echo that too, I know, so when I was an educator, I was often working with preteens and teenagers. And so a lot of development in that range of, people starting to figure out and express who they are more openly. And I think it's interesting too, because the other factor is that they're going through an identity shift in some way, whether that's just sort of letting people into who they really are, or maybe trying to figure that out. And it's interesting because the sport they played since they were 5 might be part of their identity. And to take the one thing that is like a constant, that it's like, but I can still do this, and this is still me too. I think it's really hard when you think about that being taken away from somebody who is trying to figure things out, but here's this space I feel good in, and then we're going to take it away. I just think it's definitely, we all know the benefits of sport, like if we've played sports, what it can do for us. And so, in a trying time in your life, or a challenging time maybe for preteens and teens, to have that kind of taken away is really just so detrimental,
Absolutely. And I think especially coming out of COVID, it's been a really hard time for everybody. I think, I've talked to so many athletes who have said that what has gotten them through this time has been being able to go out and ride their bike, run a 5K, play soccer with their friends, take part in sports in different ways. And so I think especially with the increased anxiety and depression that we're seeing among youth, having these kinds of outlets is really important.
Agreed. So on your website, you guys have tons of resources and valuable information. So everyone can go there and get educated and learn about what they are interested in the topic. One thing that really stood out to me, as we are now starting this Women's Independent Division II Soccer League, is the Ally Guide for Sports Leadership. And that piece was really crucial and perfectly concise for how owners, leagues, coaches, how they can make a difference in the experience for their players who are in the LGBTQ plus community. And so I would love to hear, what are some of the key ways that sports leaders can support and create inclusive environments for their athletes?
Well, thank you. I'm glad you found the resource, and I'm glad you thought it was helpful. I'll just pull out a few of the recommendations from there. So one of the first recommendations from that resource, which, by the way, folks can find at athleteally.org/resources, is around championing respect. And what that really means is, as a leader in athletics, you have the power to set the tone for a team culture. And so people around you are looking to you to see, what is kind of the tolerance level for anti-LGBTQ jokes or slurs, which should be 0, of course.
Right.
But, just they're looking to these leaders to see, how is every leader modeling what they want to see from their athletes, and not just from their athletes, from their staff, from the people around them.
Right.
And so I think, being a leader in that space, making it very clear what you stand for and why it's important to support all people, why it's important for this to be a space where everybody is safe and welcome and included, is really important. So much of the work starts there. Another part that I kind of touched on is around the fact that words matter. We know that the reason why so few professional athletes, especially in men's sports, come out is because they hear anti-LGBTQ language in the locker room all the time.
Right.
So often and I know that happens in women's sports too. I know because I remember experiencing it when I was in cross country. And I think so much of the reason why that kind of behavior is perpetuated is because even the people who are saying anti-LGBTQ language will say, oh, well, I'm not homophobic. I'm just joking around. I don't mean it that way.
Right.
And I think that's like another, good example of the fact that it doesn't matter how you mean it, it's how it's received by people.
Yes.
And whether or not you mean it to be mean or to hurt somebody, what happens is that if someone is closeted and they hear that kind of joke, they're going to think, okay, this is not a safe space. This is not a space where I can ever tell anyone who I am. This is not a space where I can let my guard down, where I can trust these people. And that's not an environment that's going to foster a strong and sustainable team culture. Another point that I'll mention is around making sure you're aware of LGBTQI plus related laws and policies. The reason that matters, and not just in the state where you live, but in states or cities or municipalities where you might be traveling for a game or a tournament, the reason that matters is because if you're traveling to a place where there are discriminatory policies in place, that puts your athletes at risk, your staff, your fans. So it's really important to know before traveling to one of those events, what exactly is kind of the landscape for LGBTQI plus folks, and also knowing, who are the organizations working on the ground there that can be resources.
Right.
But I think, it's really important, and I think really a responsibility that athletic leaders have to know what spaces they are and aren't willing to send their players to.
Right. Well, and I think as you touched on, those, like, the words matter, the space that you're creating matter. And we talk about this with our culture that we're creating, and we have different pillars, and all of them come back to this idea of creating a really safe space, right? Mental health and wellness, right? Having a space where somebody can speak up, inclusion and diversity, having a space where that is accepted and embraced and supported is so vital. And I think that's, in the sport realm, I know, especially in women's soccer right now, safety is a big issue, and it is in all facets, right? So not just one part of, whether that's abuses or emotional or mental health, it impacts them in so many ways, our players. So to not think about the space in which they're basically occupying every day as a professional player just really is like disregarding them as a human being, and starting to look at them strictly as, the ball player on the field or whatever. So it is really crucial to create those spaces. And I think additionally, we know both, from an education standpoint, for growth to happen, safety is the first level. Like, if no one feels safe, they will never grow. They will never be better. They will never learn new things. So in terms of, even in that selfish way of like a sports minded thing, if you want your athletes to perform, the more comfortable and safe they feel, the more likely they'll grow as athletes. So even if you're coming at it from which is kind of the side angle, but just understanding that all of these things will have an impact in the positive way, both personally, but also on the field or on the court or wherever, you're going to start to see your players shine in different ways. So I think it's really important. If you could speak to, so we talked a little bit about leadership roles in sports, but how can everyday people, anyone who wants to help support either Athlete Ally or the LGBTQ plus community in sports, how can they get involved? What should they be doing?
Well, first of all, we have a lot of areas for volunteers and engagement. We recently started a monthly series called Athlete Ally Engagement Days, where we spend an hour or so each month on Zoom, all together doing some kind of activity to champion LGBTQ inclusion in sports. I know a previous activity was around thanking athletic leaders, including professional athletes and organizations on the ground who have been fighting the fight and speaking out in support of inclusion. There's actually a whole range of different engagement days focusing on storytelling, education, policy, specifically a few on college administration policies. And so there's space for anyone and everyone to get involved, no matter your experience level. And the best way to learn about those engagement days is to go to athleteally.org/engage. We also have a campaign called Playing for Pride that started off as primarily a soccer campaign for the month of June. It's now going to be all year round, and we've expanded it to different sports. You also don't even have to be an athlete.
Nice.
And the way that the campaign works is people pledge a certain amount of money for if they're athletes. Professional soccer players often will pledge for every goal they score or every game their team wins.
Sure.
Other folks have pledged, for example, we have journalists who have pledged a certain amount of money for every article they write.
Love it.
Other folks will do like however many miles they run or reps they complete or iced coffees they drink. It can literally be anything.
Sure.
And we're splitting the proceeds this year with organizations on the ground in Florida and Texas, because those are the two states where our LGBTQI plus youth are under the most horrendous and nonstop attacks.
Right.
So that's another way people can get involved. You could find more information about the campaign if you look for Playing for Pride on Instagram or Twitter. You can also go to athleteally.org/news and find the Playing for Pride post there. And also just follow us on social at Athlete Ally. We post resources, stories from athletes, research findings. I'd also encourage folks to follow Chris Mosier, who is a multiple-time member of Team USA. He's the founder of transathlete.com. He is brilliant and knows so much around trans inclusion policies. He has been running a series of workshops together with our policy and program director, Ann Lieberman, around trans inclusion in sport. The two of them together are amazing resources. I also would encourage folks to follow Laisha Clarendon, Patricio Manuel, Chelsea Wolfe, Cece Tuffler. Learn about the lived experiences of LGBTQI plus athletes. Learn about, the facts and the real experiences of these athletes, rather than relying on myths and misinformation, because there's so much of that swirling around. And, I think for the allies out there, start with educating yourself and realize that by talking to the people in your life, whether that's your loved ones, your family, your friends, your neighbors, you can start a really important dialogue for people to learn more about this topic and learn how to be allies themselves. And that's really how this work starts. It's about, spreading that empathy outwards and getting as many people as possible to understand that everybody is a human being and we all deserve to play the sport that we love.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting hearing even some of what you suggested as ways to start, sort of ways to enter into the conversation, even if that just means reading things about it. But the resources that you guys have, meaning those nights where you can jump on a Zoom and listen and learn, all of these things are really accessible. So I think it's a beautiful way to kind of start if you haven't done any work on it or don't know what what it is. Then you guys have so many levels of ways that people can learn as well as get involved. And I think that's really cool, because not everybody can donate money, but they can show up to a Zoom, so lots of different ways that people could get involved. And on that note, I did see somewhere that you guys have a summit coming up. Is that correct? Or am I wrong?
Yes.
Okay.
We have
I thought I saw that somewhere.
Yes.
I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. We have a student athlete summit coming up at the end of June in Seattle at the University of Washington campus, where we'll be bringing together student athletes from across the country who want to learn more about tools and resources for building inclusive campus cultures. So you can also reach out to us for more information about that as well.
Wonderful. And before we go, I would love to hear a little bit, just sort of like some advice for athletes and kind of both categories, right? Those that are athletes in the LGBTQ plus community, but also athletes who are not and maybe want to support their fellow athletes and become an ally. What is your advice for athletes in both of those categories?
Sure. So my advice for LGBTQI plus athletes, first of all, would be, for those who are not out is, that coming out is such a deeply personal and private decision. It's the responsibility of your team, your coaches, the people around you to provide a safe environment for you to come out. I just feel that really strongly, that it is not the responsibility of an athlete to come out. It's about them feeling safe and empowered to do that. I also would want them to know that they're not alone, that there are so many LGBTQI plus athletes and allies out there who support them, who will champion them, will fight alongside with them. We have many of them as part of our ambassador program. But I think it's just really important for athletes to know that they're not alone, and that they're not alone in their experiences, but they're also not alone. If they want to be involved in the work, they're not alone in that either. That
Right.
There are people all over the world who are fighting for equality and inclusion. And I think that can be really reassuring. I know that's something I tell myself quite often when I feel overwhelmed by like the state of the world, just reminding myself that there's so many people who care.
Yes.
That really helps me. Just know that you belong, that you deserve to be exactly who you are in all parts of your life, and you deserve to play sports. For allies, I think I touched on it a little bit before, but I think the most important thing first is to get educated, to listen to LGBTQI plus athletes and what they have to say about their own experiences, to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations with the people around you who may have a lot of biases and misinformation, who may have really deeply entrenched homophobic and transphobic beliefs around people, but also specifically around sports. And be able to talk to them about that and share what you know and what you've read and what you've learned and why you feel moved to be a voice for kindness and for inclusion. That's a huge part of the work, is just being willing to have those conversations. And it's amazing what can come out of those conversations in terms of people really shifting their thinking and changing their hearts and their minds, and expanding to be more open and more empathetic.
Yeah. And that you used a phrase that was really beautiful to me, which was a voice for kindness, because really when you start to boil it down, it's choosing kindness, right? It's using your voice to say that you care about other human beings, period. And so that I think is a beautiful note for us to end on. I thank you so much for your sharing all of your knowledge. I'm sure we could talk for tons of time on this, but I so appreciate at least getting the dialogue going, and I'm sure we will be in touch plenty with Athlete Ally as we get our teams starting to get on the field. I know I want our coaches to really be taking that course that you guys are developing. I think it's amazing, and it's only going to lead to more progress. Whether that's slow or fast, we do one step at a time, and we're there for it as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me as a part of this conversation.
Thank you so much for being here today. We hope that you have gained a wealth of knowledge from Joanna at Athlete Ally, and we will be sure to link and tag on our social media channels all of the information that you can find on their website as well as their social channels. So be sure to follow along. Please join us next month, Wednesday, July 5th, for our next episode. And until then, if you're somebody working to make change in the women's game, be sure to tag us on your social medias so that we can see your culture in action. And until next time, be bold, go out and make a difference.